We're live.
Thank you for joining us today for our Worker Wednesday lunch hour. Today, Community Legal Services will be giving us an update on our rights as restaurant workers here in Pennsylvania and returning to work. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. For those of you using Zoom app, the Zoom platform, please change your username to your first name and your last initial, and please add your pronouns. How you do that is click over the three dots, the ellipsis, and then you can edit your name. Make sure to stay on mute to help limit any unnecessary sounds and folks talking over each other. Use the chat function to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. For those of you guys calling in, please press *6 to unmute. Again, we'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us. Hey, thank you for joining us today for our Worker Wednesday lunch hour. Today, Community Legal Services will be updating us on our rights as restaurant workers here in PA as we return to work. For folks using the Zoom platform, please change your first name. Please edit and change your first name and last initial, and please add your pronouns. You can use the three dots above your name, the ellipsis, to edit your name. Please, while you're on Zoom, stay on mute to help limit any unnecessary sounds of folks talking over each other. Use the chat platform or function to raise your hand. Use the chat function to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. For those of you guys calling in, press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Well, we will be getting started in about 1 minute.
And for those of you joining on Facebook, feel free to put questions into the Facebook comment section, and we'll be monitoring that and either answering them live as best we can or answering them after the fact if we're not able to get to them live. So thank you. We're going to get started in just a bit.
Thank you for joining us today for our Worker Wednesday lunch hour. Today, Community Legal Services will be updating us on our rights here as restaurant workers as we return to work. For those of you using our Zoom platform, please change your username to your first name and your last initial. Make sure you to add your pronouns. To do that, click on the ellipsis, the three dots, in which case you can edit your name. Please stay on mute to help limit any unnecessary sounds and folks talking over each other. Use the chat function to raise your hand if you would like to speak. For those calling in, you can use *6 to unmute and to mute yourself. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Hey folks out there in Facebook and on Zoom, thank you for joining us today for our Worker Wednesday lunch hour. Today, Community Legal Services will be updating us on our rights as restaurant workers here in Pennsylvania as we return to work. For those of you using our Zoom platform, please change your username to your first name and your last initial. Make sure to add your pronouns. You can hover over the ellipsis, the three dots, to edit your name. Please stay on mute to help limit any unnecessary sounds and folks talking over each other. Use the chat function to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. For those of you calling in, use *6 to unmute. We have a very important conversation today around restaurant work this year and returning to work. Let's get into it. So restaurant work 2020, our pre-COVID realities. So we want to have a conversation around what our rights are as workers and what organizing we have seen and where we go going back, how we proceed going back to work. What I wanted to talk about in this piece here, what we should be talking about also is thinking about what were our pre-COVID realities, our two-tiered industry and our gig economy trap house. What do we mean by that? Well, let's think about before COVID started. 8 of the 15 lowest paid occupations are restaurant jobs, and 7 of the 15 are tipped occupations. So in 2020, restaurants were projected to bring in $899 billion in sales. So $899 billion in sales, and we have 7 of the 15 lowest paid occupations in the country were in the restaurant industry. So you have a very, very fruitful industry making a lot of money on the backs of the poorest folks in the country. That was before COVID. And so we need to keep that in perspective as we talk about going back to work. The tip minimum wage, as we know, people who work in the food service industry, their tips put a lot of women in compromising positions. And it actually made for work to be harder. And as a lot of people know, sexual harassment claims make up a vast majority in the food service industry. And so as we saw some years, the largest source of EEOC sexual harassment claims were through the restaurant industry. So we had a lot of exploitative work, right? So we had the least paid workforce, the most exploited, and the least protected. And when we talk about the gig economy, which was something that we were facing before COVID also. So our generation's gig economy has emerged within restaurant work, has been cloaked with notions of flexibility and choice that disguise as a business model that basically evade the traditional responsibilities of employers. So gig work has kind of created a new sub-minimum wage workforce and is becoming the new facilitator for food delivery work. Think about Uber Eats, DoorDash, and what have you, Amazon Flex, Instacart. So the reality of those jobs, we were seeing that those conversations emerged before COVID. So we say to say, let's think about the industry we're actually going back to. You know, I know folks want to get back to work, but let's think about the actual work we are going back to. Let's talk about who's impacted. In this situation, as normal, our family has been impacted by low wages, right? Your kids, your community, your neighbors are impacted by that. And this kind of new angle, not new angle, but really, yeah, it's a new angle. Customers are impacted because if we're talking about COVID, which is a virus, your customers can be impacted if folks are can get sick if employers are not taking the right standards. So also who's impacted, the number of PA employed, 1.1 million jobs lost. Of that, 354,000 were in the hospitality and leisure, just in Pennsylvania I'm talking about. And around 75% of leisure and hospitality workers are particularly in restaurant settings. So a lot of work has been lost, and that's a lot of families, that's a lot of community. And with the people going back to work, that's a lot of customers that could be impacted if we don't go back to work safely under safe conditions. So again, who's being called back to work, right? So if we start from while COVID was going on, who did we see in restaurants? Or excuse me, who did we see going back to work? Fast food, grocery store workers, delivery driver, and again, gig workers. So even during the most vulnerable part of this COVID, when we're still in it, by the way, the food service industry, again, being the lowest paid, were considered essential workers. And so we really have to take in consideration who is being called back. And it's the people who are less protected, who make the least amount of money, who are being called back to work so people can go out to eat. And so people can put food on their tables. We need to think about that going back to work. You and your coworkers, regardless of your immigration status, should only work if you feel healthy and it's safe to do so. All companies have a legal responsibility to maintain a workplace free of recognized hazards. In the current situation, that means a workplace where workers do not catch the virus. The DA will go into more details around that, but again, those are some of our legal rights that we need to think about when we're going back. If you feel that your work is unhealthy or unsafe, there are actions that you and your coworkers can take before working. You should collectively demand that your employer follow health and safety rules and recommendations, demand that your employer implement other necessary health and safety measures, and you're able to refuse work or unhealthy work. More importantly, make sure you get with your coworkers and put forward a vision on how things can be different. We need to make sure we are offering the proper changes to these workplaces. So why is our restaurant opening? That's a question we really need to think about. What is the reason for the restaurant opening? Money, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is about money, money, money. So again, just think about when we're going back to work for. I'm going to pass it over to Bobby, our rock organizer in Pittsburgh, to talk about what we have seen and how we avoid employers who are not doing the right thing.
Okay, so just to go over some of what we have seen, workers early in the shutdown, we had a group of workers who were flat out denied pay that they had already earned before the shutdown. A group as small as 4 employees decided to take action and make a petition to put public pressure on the employer. The operator refused employees' questions regarding their pay and refused to clarify any steps he was taking to secure the money to pay them. The employees agreed to have Rock discuss workplace issues and present the case with an attorney at the Community Justice Project. As the campaign progressed, the employees began to report other issues with the employer, such as racism, late paychecks, personal checks, not receiving pay stubs. These caused one employee to lose their SNAP benefits. The employees continued to organize, speaking with the manager of the building in which the restaurant was located. The landlord decided to no longer allow that owner to operate a restaurant or any business in his building. The operator's racism was also exposed during the campaign, which led to a local winery to refuse to associate or do any business with the restaurant owner. The employees received the wages that they were due. They decided to continue legal action to recoup late payment charges, overdraft fees, etc. The law states that they are entitled to an additional 25% or $500, whichever is greater. So that's where we are at with that case. And then We also had another group of employees who were concerned with lack of communication, and they are currently organizing around reopening safely. After discussing many issues that they were experiencing prior to the closure, such as unfair wages, management making promises about wages and benefits and not following through, the employees came together and drafted a demand letter. Once the demand letter was drafted, more than 30 employees joined in the campaign and signed on to that letter. Initially, the operator ignored the demand letter until we did a coworker.org petition. The petition received a lot of attention, and just later, the operator reached out asking to meet with the employees to discuss the issues. During that meeting, the operator reported that he would be paying everyone an extra $2 per hour hazard pay when they came back, and that he would also develop a fair evaluation and raise system, as well as drafting job descriptions for them. However, the employer has used the threat of closing as a way to avoid participating in conversations. The employees have maintained pressure around rehiring, and will be pressuring him to agree to rehire based on seniority. And what we're seeing is negligent employers using the pandemic to get rid of senior staff who are making a higher hourly rate, and they are also using it to retaliate against staff for organizing. But the fight is not over for those employees, and Rock will be meeting soon with them to discuss the next steps.
Thanks, Bobby. And these are just two situations. Us at Rock, we've heard a lot more, and we're helping a lot more restaurant workers in that way. But the main things that folks need to realize is that we need to know our rights as restaurant workers. We need to be checking in with our coworkers, the folks who are called back. We should be documenting our issues and concerns. We should be checking in with the employers and management. And we should also be following up if we need help with local organizations like the Restaurant Opportunity Center and CLS. Up next, we have the State Director of Pennsylvania, Sam Jones, who will be talking about how you turn down work.
Okay, thank you, Calvin. And I would like to inform everyone that Calvin Okonye is our senior organizer here in Philadelphia, and he's doing a wonderful job of conducting this. And you will soon meet our CLS partner, Nadia Hefka, who will talk about the legalities of everything. So one of the other problems that we're seeing is, and we've gotten calls from across the state, primarily in the Northeast and Easton and also Pittsburgh, areas that have reopened a little quicker than Philadelphia. And folks are very concerned, and rightfully so, about returning to work without safety precautions being in place. So we want you to understand that you have the absolute right to act along with coworkers to address work-related issues, and your employer cannot retaliate against you. If retaliation occurs, we have our partners at Community Legal Services, we have Women's Law Project that will get involved, and we have the State Attorney General, so we can direct you to legal organizations to protect you against retaliation. You have the right to circulate a petition asking for better safety protections or paid sick time. You can participate in a concerted refusal to work under unsafe conditions. You can join coworkers to talk directly to your employer. And I cannot emphasize this enough, reach out to ROC and other organizations that can help facilitate the conversation and guide you around navigating this very complex issue. The key is not acting alone. If you act alone, you actually can be You can be terminated, but you're protected when you're acting as a group. You can practice social distancing and still organize your workplace through email, text, or petitions, through the media or group chats if necessary. And sometimes when you're even acting alone, you can be protected. Nadia, I think we'll talk about some of those situations where that is possible. Um, and if you have questions, please put them in the Zoom chat, and we will answer as many of those questions as we can at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Sam. And so next we're going to get into the return to work conversation, the legal part with Nadia Hefka, who's a supervising attorney at Community Legal Services.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, we will be taking questions at the end. So if you're on the Zoom, please feel free to use the chat box. And if you're watching this on Facebook, we're also monitoring that comment section. So put your questions there and we will try to handle them live or after the fact. So I wanted to talk a little bit about legal rights. And we all know legal rights can exist on paper, and it's important to know what they are, but you definitely need to know what to do in order to enforce your rights, because as we know, just because there's laws on the books about sexual harassment doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. You might need to do something in order to enforce those rights. We're going to talk about doing that safely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, since we're based in Philadelphia, we know that Philadelphia restaurants are starting to open. Some have been open for a while with delivery, but others are calling people back. As both Sam, actually all three of my prior panelists, Sam, Calvin, and Bobby, all talked about returning to work safely. So how do you find out what is safe right now? There are rules out there under both the Centers for Disease Control and OSHA that are the federal rules about what are the best workplace practices. If you are concerned about your workplace, I recommend taking a look at those instructions. The CDC has specific instructions for restaurants. As well, the Pennsylvania government has put out rules via the Department of Health. So there are rules that employers need to follow, and the Department of Health is the one enforcing that in Pennsylvania. So take a look at all of those if you are concerned about what your employer is doing and whether they're actually following those rules. Next slide. So what are the kinds of things that a restaurant might need to provide? So some of these make logical sense, especially if some of you are back to work or seeing what other folks are doing. But things like masks, some sort of barrier, isolation, a screening of workers. They can actually screen with temperature checks, etc. Distancing between you and customers, also between coworkers. A reduction of numbers of people in an establishment, mandating or allowing lots of time for hand washing, lots of cleaning, and communication. Communication meaning like letting you know if there is a problem at the workplace. Doesn't mean exposing someone's confidential private business to others, but to just say something has happened here and we're aware of it, and we're going to take the following measures to make sure you get sent home with sick pay, for instance. So those are the kinds of things that are required. So how do you get those things if you're not getting them? We're all talked about getting together with coworkers. Not only is there power in numbers, because if you all get together, you are more able to get things out of your employer just because you're all standing together. So, but legally, you're more protected if you ask for things together. So the National Labor Relations Act is the law that says that workers have the right to get together to take collective action on any topic, whether it's health and safety or raises or anything else. So you can do it by organizing a group meeting, circulating a petition, stopping work and walking off the job together, which is basically like a strike, or speaking publicly about the circumstances on your job. Finally, there would be reporting your employer is also a form of collective action. So If you do any of those things, you are protected from retaliation. What that means is that if you're fired or demoted or treated poorly as a result of taking some actions, then you would have a legal claim to make. And you might have a way to keep your unemployment if you're currently on unemployment. So unless you're undocumented, undocumented folks unfortunately can't get unemployment, but everyone else has protection from retaliation. And even undocumented workers have protection from retaliation, but it's a little trickier for our brothers and sisters who are undocumented if they can't get unemployment for time out of work. Just like right now, after furloughs, they aren't getting unemployment. Okay, so again, we talked about acting collectively. Other than health and safety, what else can you ask for? You can ask for pay issues. You can ask for hazard pay, and a lot of folks are. In particular, think about how are tipped workers going to do in this limited reopening, where maybe not as many customers are sitting down or having drinks at a bar. How are bartenders going to make the money? Um, how are the bus staff going to make money if they're being tipped out by folks who aren't making a lot of tips and being asked to do a lot more side work, right? So these are all things that you're going to see once you return to work. How are things really changing now that you're back to work? And is that commensurate? The way you're being paid, is it commensurate with what you're actually experiencing and the danger? Beyond health and safety, also want to think about what you want your workplace to look like. So even though health and safety is the key thing we want to discuss today, there are other things that happen in restaurants that you want to think about asking for, whether it's now or in the future. These are the kinds of things you can ask for collectively. So just be aware that it's not just about health and safety, but even though health and safety is the key thing, right now, as you're being called back to work, a lot of restaurants are doing it because they want their PPP loans to get turned into PPP grants. So you may have more leverage than you think you have if you're being told, take it or leave it. They're having one-on-one conversations with everyone at your workplace saying, come back to work and here are the terms. Well, you want to ask more about exactly what's going to happen and talk to your coworkers about what are you being told? Maybe we can work on this together. The other kinds of things that we want people to be aware of are, next slide, yeah. In terms of if you go back to work or you hear from your employer as they're offering your job, these are my plans as to how we're going to keep you safe. You want to address those issues directly, because again, you have power as a group. You have power with customers. You have power with exposing bad practices that might be putting communities at risk. It's really, this crisis is putting it really clear to a lot of people how dependent we are on businesses doing the right thing to keep everyone safe, right? And so if you understand that and address that directly, you may be able to solve it in your own workplace, or you may have a reason to take it further and file a complaint. So as I mentioned before, the Pennsylvania Department of Health is enforcing the governor's executive orders on health and safety in the workplace. We recommend going there as opposed to OSHA. You can also go to OSHA, but OSHA doesn't have a lot of resources, and you're not necessarily going to get a quick response. The Department of Health is apparently, we know of other groups that have contacted the Department of Health and gotten good responses. So be aware that that is an option. In Philadelphia, you can also call 311. I'm not sure if that's available if you're calling in from different parts of the state. So find out whether there's a local Department of Health. Some counties have their own departments of health that may also be taking action. We also understand that the state police is doing some work in this regard, but I would caution you, a lot of folks, for so many reasons, but absolutely for racial justice reasons and immigration reasons, you want to think twice about bringing the police in, or talk to them about what would happen, and talk to your coworkers about whether that's a path you want to take. So be aware that you're protected from retaliation as well for most of these acts, but certainly I would not call OSHA as an individual worker. I would make it clear as a group that this is what you're doing, and tell the employer about your concerns first, so that you're protected under the labor laws that I told you about in a prior slide. Okay, quickly, immigrant workers have rights. A lot of folks think they don't have any rights. That's not true. You have a right to a safe and healthy workplace. You have the right to collectively bargain, which means getting together with coworkers. It doesn't mean you're necessarily bargaining for a union contract, but you're asking for fair treatment as a group. Immigrant workers have all of these rights. It's just that they might not get the same kinds of back pay awards if you end up going to court. And of course, they are more fearful that an employer will retaliate against them in a way that really impacts their families. So that would be illegal for an employer to retaliate against immigrant workers by calling immigration, for instance, but we know that those threats are made. So if you have immigrant workers in your workplace, make sure that you talk these issues through with them, and maybe take the lead yourselves, as opposed to putting your immigrant brothers and sisters on the front line of a petition, of a letter to an employer. Okay, so let me go through the next couple very quickly. Yes, employers can make you wear a mask at work, and there's a good medical reason for it. We're learning more about this virus all the time, and we're learning that masks are the best tool to keep you safe. I understand some customers might not want to wear masks, and that's a question: is what is your employer going to do about keeping customers out that refuse to wear masks? But how do you make customers wear masks as they're eating? That's an open question. I don't think you can, right? So these are all issues that we want to be watching and monitoring as we learn more about like what the best medical advice is. Can they take your temperature? Apparently, yes. There is a new rule from the EEOC, that's the federal agency, anti-discrimination agency, and they say that yes, you can screen employees for temperature. Now we know that doesn't capture everyone who might be about to get the disease and not displaying symptoms yet, but that seems to be one of the things that employers are allowed to do. Normally, employers can only check on your health in certain circumstances, but the situation now is different, and some of these questions of law are going to be different as we go along. Next slide. Can you be required to take a COVID-19 test? We have heard about restaurant workers in Philly being asked to get an actual test in hand in order to return to work. We think that's problematic. We don't know to what extent employers are going to be allowed to do this. So certainly for certain kinds of jobs, like in healthcare, there might be an ability to get to require employees to be tested. The question is whether restaurant workers can be required to be tested or not, and can they make you pay for it? I think they probably can't make you pay for it, and I don't know how valid a test is because it just shows that you're not positive at that moment. But these are potential discrimination issues that have to be figured out. And if your employer is demanding a test result, you want to find out whether they're demanding that of everyone or just certain groups. Like if they're only demanding it of immigrant workers, that could be a discrimination claim. If they're only demanding it of the African-American workers, there could be a discrimination claim there, right? So, or older workers, your employer can't just say, I'm not letting older workers back. They can't make those kinds of decisions for you. But what we're not clear on is the extent to which this government will allow employers to selectively test for certain jobs. And that's something we're going to keep an eye on, and definitely let us know if you see anything like that in your workplace that seems off. Find out more about what's happening and get in touch with some legal help. Okay, now, if you or a family member have a health condition that puts you at high risk, like diabetes is apparently one, lung conditions, etc., then we recommend, if you're worried about returning to work because of your own health conditions, or maybe even because of a family member's, health condition that you live with. Now is the time before you're called back to work to get a note from that doctor that might give you some ability to ask for leave or to not return to work. And the reason we're talking about this is if you turn down a return to work request, you might be able to turn it down if you have good cause, and then still keep your unemployment benefits, whether you're getting regular unemployment or PUA, which is the new program for folks who didn't qualify for regular. So get a doctor's note, tell your employer and ask for an accommodation, right? And if they can't give you an accommodation, then you might have good cause to turn down that job. So anyone with high risk situation, maybe now is not the best time to feel like you're going to have to be a guinea pig for the your employer and just see how they're going to do with all these policies they say they're going to put in place. You want to protect yourself, and that's key. And so the other thing to be aware of is that federal law that passed in March, the FFCRA, gives you 2 weeks paid leave if you are either self-quarantined for purposes of COVID or have been or actually are positive for COVID, or time to care for a family member who's been either told to self-isolate or quarantine. So again, you want to get a doctor's note in hand if you can, if that is your situation. Next slide. Okay. The other thing that we're hearing about is people being asked to come back to work, but they don't have childcare. So again, this is something that you could handle collectively. Any of these issues are things that you could raise as a group, because there are probably other people with health conditions like we discussed on the prior slide, or childcare issues. So these are not necessarily solely individual issues. I want to make that clear. You could raise even individual issues collectively, because you could find that multiple people have such issues. But if you don't have childcare, or childcare is super limited and far away, or prohibitively expensive because only 25% of the facilities are open right now, then talk to your employer to see if there's anything that can be done to allow you, in restaurants, it's hard to do remote work, right? It's not an office job, but maybe there's some other accommodation that can be made. And if not, you might be able to take leave under that federal FFCRA law, or under a local ordinance like the Philadelphia Sick Leave Law. Be aware that these things exist. Or if you turn down the return to work job after trying to figure something out with your employer about your childcare problem, then you might not get cut off of unemployment comp, right? So again, you want to put things like this in writing if possible, so that you have a record that you tried to figure things out with your employer, you tried to ask for leave, etc. What about pay reductions? Some under that PPP law, not PPE, but the small business loan program, that employers need a certain amount of workers back to get the loan changed into a grant, right? That's a big thing that they're trying to get done. They are allowed under that program to reduce pay by 25%. Now, employers are allowed to reduce pay unless you're in a union that literally spells that out. So typically, most restaurant workers are not in unions, so they are legally allowed to reduce your pay. But the thing is that you have the ability to negotiate over that, especially if you join together and understand that the employer needs a certain amount of people to come back right now for that very specific loan into grant reason. So although they are allowed to reduce your pay, it doesn't mean that you must just accept it as, that's what's going to happen, right? So so yes, it is something they are allowed to do under the law, but again, the key to a lot of these things I'm talking about is getting together with your coworkers and trying to fight for better, because the law allows all kinds of stuff to happen. It's the question is, what are you going to do about it in your own workplace? And then if I've already alluded to this, but if you refuse to return to work, A lot of employers are telling people, if you don't return to work, you're going to get cut off of unemployment. That is not necessarily true. Now, I can't tell you with any degree of certainty what the state is going to do about unemployment, but there is case law in Pennsylvania that says if you have good cause to refuse to return to work, then you can keep your unemployment. So we are very hopeful, especially if you document that you tried to work things out with your employer over childcare, over a health and safety issue of your own, or health and safety for the workplace. If you show that there was a problem at the job and you tried to resolve it, then you might be able to refuse to return to work and still keep your unemployment. So this is yet another reason why it's a good idea to get together with your coworkers to put together a list of demands, put it in writing so that you're all protected from, you have a paper trail of the fact that you did this, whether it's on paper or by email or whatever it is. And then if you end up refusing to return to work, then you have that paper trail for unemployment as well at the same time. So the kinds of things that are good cause were listed there, and it includes workplace health and safety, lack of childcare, as well as significant reduction in pay and or benefits. So I told you that they can reduce your pay under the PPP program by 25%. We don't know yet what the state is going to say. Does the state believe that 25% is significant enough to allow you to turn down that job? I wish I knew the answer to that. We've been asking the state for clarity. We don't know yet. So there is a risk that if you turn down a job just because they reduced your pay, that they're going to cut you off of unemployment. But if they're turning down, if they're reducing your pay and something else is happening, like childcare is a problem or health and safety concerns, then at that point, then you might have good cause. So I wish I could give you more direct advice. If we hear something from the state on this, we will certainly spread the word about that. But as of right now, there has to be, under the law, it's a significant reduction in pay and or benefits as good cause. Okay. Again, there's a risk if you turn down work, you might lose your unemployment. So be aware, like as you're making these decisions right now, without us being able to give you more clear instructions, that 600 extra a week, if you're getting unemployment, that 600 extra only lasts until July 31st. So, you know, there's a risk that if you put them off or refuse, then that might cut off your relationship with this job for the future. So that's the thing that you have to consider on your own or with your colleagues as you're trying to figure out what you want to do as a group. And that's about it for me. For this panel, I want you to just be aware that Community Legal Services is here. We represent anyone who lives in Philadelphia, and we're hearing a lot from people right now with these exact concerns that we went over today. We're available at 981-3700 if you live in Philadelphia. If you live outside of Philadelphia, take a look at our information on our website, because we have a ton of material in a variety of languages on your rights, especially your rights under COVID. And before I go to questions, I am being told that there is a question here, so I'm going to read it. There's a question from Karen on Facebook. If daycare is still closed when an employee's job reopens, how does a worker report to work when he or she has children? And if the worker can't report to work, will they lose their unemployment benefits? So hopefully I answered this for you, but let me just go over it again. If you don't have daycare and you don't have a backup necessarily, because you can't necessarily leave your kid with family members as you may have done in the past, also because of social distancing concerns, right? So if you don't have a safe daycare that you trust, a childcare situation, then you may be able to turn down that return to work offer and keep your unemployment. Or you may be able to talk to your employer about taking leave. You can get 12 weeks of leave under the federal, it's called the FFCRA. It's the law that passed in March. The FFCRA gives you childcare leave at 2/3 of your pay for 12 weeks. So that's another option if you think like, especially if, let's say, you get healthcare through your job and you want to maintain that relationship with your employer, they're offering you your job back. You might want to say, look, I'd like to come back, but I don't have childcare. Can I take leave under this federal law? If they refuse that, that could be illegal, but in the meantime, you could probably maintain your unemployment. So talk to a lawyer if they refuse your request for childcare. Employers can ask you for proof that your childcare is closed. That shouldn't be too hard to come by. But there's small things like that they might ask you for if you tell them that you can't return to work because of lack of childcare. And again, it should be childcare that you trust and feel safe with. They can't force you to send your kid to like crazy expensive or far away childcare, or childcare that's unsafe, like putting your relative at risk in order to watch your kid for you, right? So all of these things should be discussed with your employer, and don't feel like you must return to work just because they're asking you to return to work if you have some really good reasons for not returning to work.
Nadia, there was another question from Karen. If restaurant workers are included as essential workforce, shouldn't they receive extra pay like medical staff?
Right. So how did medical staff get that extra pay? Some medical staff is getting extra pay, not all. So there's no entitlement under the law to get what we call hazard pay for working under dangerous circumstances. It's not going to be just given to you, but that is a demand that you can make of your employer. It's a demand we can make of all employers right now. There's talk about having something like that passed as a law, but there's nothing on the books right now that requires it. So if you think that, going back to work for $2.83 an hour is not reflective of the amount of danger I'm about to put myself in by being a frontline worker, then you can ask for more, and even better, ask for more with your coworkers, so that you have a better chance of getting it. Some places are giving hazard pay. Some places are giving guaranteed shift pay to tipped workers, right? And so that's all potentially on the table. Like we said, if you go to your employer and they don't want to talk to you, Bobby gave the example earlier about workers who were asking for certain things from their employer, and when the employer didn't respond, they took it public, right? Right now, the public is really interested in knowing what's going on at restaurants, and knowing that people are being treated fairly. So think about that as an option for you, and escalating things as you go along. But any of the organizers on the call want to answer that one?
No, I think that was a perfect answer. But we
Thanks,
did have
Sam.
a question. Yeah, we did have a question come into Rock via email about whether an employer can be required to give workers a COVID test if a worker has tested positive. Can they request that, and does that employer have to pay for that test for the workers that are concerned?
So let's see. It's not clear yet what employers are going to be allowed to do in terms of testing. The EEOC says that employers under certain circumstances can ask for tests. We're not sure whether that's going to apply to restaurants or just healthcare. Like, what's not clear yet to me is which kinds of employers are allowed to require tests. Now, if they find that if they have a known case of COVID on staff, can they then require everyone to get tested? That's a possibility. What you should be thinking about is, if there's a known COVID case on staff, will they send everyone home and pay everyone sick leave, right? In Philly, there is a sick leave ordinance. But in other parts of the state, if you don't have a sick leave ordinance, or if your employer doesn't have a paid sick leave policy, you would want, I would think that if you're a restaurant worker, you would want to know that everyone's going to get paid sick if they have COVID, because if not, people won't report it and people will continue to go to work sick, right? So yes, they are allowed to do temperature screenings of workers. I just don't know the answer of whether they're going to be able to make people take tests. Certainly, if they're going to make people take tests, I would think that they wouldn't be allowed to make you pay for it, that they would have to be the ones paying for it since they're requiring it. But I don't know whether they can force you to take a test. It's possible, and let's be honest. The federal EEOC is controlled by the Trump administration, so probably they will allow employers to be intrusive in that way and certain requirements. But I would certainly argue that they can't make you pay for that test, and that they should pay for that test as a hazard of doing work, right? So if you are in that position, I would say try to get some legal advice or organizing advice, and check with your local Department of Health to see if they have any rules in place for that kind of mandatory testing by employers.
And just to follow up, if there is a case of COVID that has been discovered in your workplace, can a worker request a test at the expense of the employer?
You can request it. Yes, you can request it. I don't think that the law is clear on whether they must pay for that. But that's something you can ask for, again, collectively as a group. You can say, look, if even before it happens, you can say to your employer, we are concerned about what will happen if someone on the job gets COVID. Please let us know like what your rules will be. Will people get paid leave if they're sent home? Will people be able to get tested not out of their own pocket, right? So that's what I would think about approaching your employer with right now if you're being called back to work, or even if you've returned to work and you have these concerns. It's not just people who are being called back. Lots of people are already back on the job.
Cool. And I just we have about 5 minutes. If there are any more questions on Facebook, if our attendees don't have any questions, which I don't see that they do, I just want to thank you, Nadia, for joining us today for our Worker Wednesday lunch hour. Thank Bobby. Thank you, Sam, and definitely shout out to Sherilyn for doing doing some of the tech work. And just to kind of wrap it up, folks, make sure we know our rights going back to work. Make sure we're doing this homework, and make sure we are speaking with our coworkers and speaking with. Go ahead. Speaking with managers and business owners about our rights and our safety going back to work. Make sure also to reach out to organizations like CLS and the Restaurant Opportunity Center to help navigate some of those conversations. We definitely will host it and help you guys work through it. If that's all, have a good day. And
Calvin, before we end, I just wanted to remind our ROC members on the call, or anyone who needs additional information, we will be having our regular monthly virtual statewide meeting on Tuesday at 6:30, and you will be getting notified about that shortly. If you wish to continue this conversation or have other issues that you'd like to discuss at our monthly meeting, please get in touch with Calvin, Bobby, or myself, and our emails are all our first name at rockunited.org. I'll put mine in the chat, and if you guys can do the same, that would be awesome.
all right, peace, everybody.
Thank you.
I think we are still live on Facebook, Sherilyn. We can cut that. Remove. Maybe I have to do it. Sherilyn still there?